Right, hi YouTube. I've received a question regarding tips on how to ride economically and how to achieve the maximum miles per gallon whilst you're riding. Um, this question got me thinking about what affects fuel consumption and subsequently what we can do as riders to influence this. And I've come up with 10 tips for you. Now, firstly, I am no expert on this, and I'm sure that the keyboard warriors out there will be tapping away to the point of distraction to point out all the flaws in my logic. But nonetheless, here are my thoughts, and you can take what you think is useful and you can dump what else that you don't. So, secondly, please don't take these tips literally, and do not, under any circumstances, sacrifice safety for the point purpose of getting an extra miles per gallon out of your riding. They are suggestions, and they're for you to digest. Consider what is really good, consider what is bad, and like I say, if you follow any of these and you have an accident, that's your responsibility, not mine. I'm just giving you my thoughts here, but I'm also advising you that do not sacrifice safety under any circumstances. I also recommend, if you haven't done so already, that you take an advanced riding course. I've done one of those courses and I found it invaluable, and it is proven to actually have helped with the fuel economy just by riding smoothly. And one of those courses will help immensely. So if you haven't done one, just do one. Honestly, it will really improve your riding and it will help with fuel consumption. Right, so let's get into the tips now then, and let me try to sort of explain this. So the first tip is to ensure that your motorcycle is well maintained. I've just mentioned about the efficiency of the engine when it's running, and that engine can only really be efficient once it's properly maintained and in tip-top condition. So, one of the best things you can do to sort of improve your fuel economy is to service your bike regularly and make sure that engine is running as sweet as it possibly can. So, a nice easy tip. So that's tip one. Tip two is to use a light throttle. And what I mean by that is use sort of light pressure to roll the throttle on gently and not just snap it from fully open or from fully shut to fully open or vice versa. 0 to 60 tests, as fun as they are going to require you to use a hell of a lot more fuel. You will cover that distance a lot quicker, but ultimately you're going to use more fuel to cover that distance. So therefore, if we can use smooth and light throttle movements to gradually build up speed, that's going to be more fuel efficient. And in effect, the same speed can still be reached, but just over a longer distance. So it's not necessarily the speed you're doing. It's the way in which you're accelerating to reach that speed. So try and be as smooth and as light as possible, and your fuel economy will increase. Tip three is about being in the right gear and riding smoothly. So, well, I suppose technically that's two tips, but they are linked. Remember, the more work the engine has to do, the greater the fuel consumption will be. So, if you're in too low a gear, the engine needs to generate more force, more power, and has to work a lot harder, i.e., the engine labours and it doesn't spin up so quickly. So, too high a gear will create the need for greater revs, and therefore will increase greater consumption as you have to open that throttle more to get more fuel in there to generate that more power. So how do we know whether we are in the correct gear? If you've ridden a bike for some time now, this will be sort of easy for you to understand. But on a manual bike, it's a matter of feel. And I just like to find the point in the rev range whereby the bike's speed can be controlled by using the throttle. If I wind the throttle on, I get instant power and instant acceleration, and if I wind it off, my speed reduces due to the engine braking, and I can balance my speed by using that throttle control. Um, and generally, for me and my riding style, I find that to be in the middle of the rev range. So it's a good guide to try, and you can see see whether that works for you. And generally, that means that the engine can spin up and spin down really, really quickly, and you've got that control on your throttle, which ultimately will make you smoother. So when I say riding smoothly, what do I mean by this? Um, well, if you look further ahead and plan your riding a little bit better, so that you can see obstacles and what's happening in front of you, you have more time to be able to arrive at whatever that condition may be at the right speed. And as long as you keep sufficient space around you, when you come up to changes in speed limits, etc., you can just roll off the throttle and you can arrive and reduce your speed so you're at correct speed, or you can come up in a controlled manner to a roundabout, etc., or junction. And what that's doing is giving you greater control, and more importantly, it's reducing the need for you to brake heavily. When you brake heavily, your fuel consumption is gonna reduce significantly. So I'm not advocating that you don't use your brakes. I'm talking about that really heavy braking to slow the bike down. Your brakes are there to stop you, so please don't think I'm suggesting you don't use them. What am suggesting is if you plan ahead a little bit better, and you've got your more control on your throttle, you can manage your speed a lot better, and therefore reduce the need to brake, and therefore you keep your bike running efficiently. Right. Tip 4 is associated with driving smoothly, but it's more focused on about reducing the need to stop. So when you're stopped, your bike is idling and it is consuming fuel with no benefit to you, i.e. you're not moving forward. So that fuel is being wasted. So if you're coming up to traffic, then reduce your speed and plan a filter. So filter through that traffic if you can, but do so where it is safe and legal to do so. It's not necessarily legal in all places, so you'll need to check your local riding conditions. But filter where you possibly can, and keep that bike moving and keep making progress. Another opportunity is when you're approaching roundabouts. For those countries that have roundabouts, if you plan it correctly, you may be able to enter that roundabout without stopping. You're not always going to be able to do that because the way the traffic conditions can work. But yet again, if you can keep momentum going, then that's a good thing. Because remember, while you're idling, you're consuming fuel unnecessarily. So avoid lengthy stops. And what I mean by that is if you have the opportunity, plan your route a little bit better. And the shortest route is not always going to be the most economical, particularly if it involves numerous stops and starts. But traveling at a consistent sort of 50, 60 miles per hour will probably be the most efficient. Um, 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 and therefore, if you plan a slightly different route, you're likely to get a bit more economy out of your bike and a few extra miles per gallon, even though it might not be the shortest route. Right, tip 5 is about lightening the load. Um, the more weight that the bike has to transfer, the harder the engine's going to have to work. It's going to have to generate a lot more power to be able to move that weight. So if we can lighten the amount of weight mass that the bike has to transport, the fuel economy is going to increase. Now, how can we do that? Well, we could go on a diet. But let's get real about this. I'm not going to do that, and you probably ain't. But the important point there is that the smaller the person that's on the bike, i.e. the less mass it's having to transfer, they're likely to get greater economy. So if you're a rather well-built person, your economy of your bike is going to be less than someone who's got something smaller. So that's all going to be an individual thing. But we can still do some things to lighten that load. Like when I go out for a ride, I'm quite lazy. I will, however the bike is configured, whether it's got the top box on or the panniers on, I'll use it. Whether the frunk is full with all the stuff that I used on my last journey, I use it. And as a result of that, I'm transporting around a lot of other stuff, a lot of weight that I don't necessarily need. So if fuel economy is your thing and you want to get the maximum economy out of your bike, give some consideration to what you're transporting with you and reduce that as much as you can, and your economy will go up. Right, tip 6 is use the correct tyre pressures. So low tire pressures increase rolling resistance. So the engine of the bike needs to work harder to overcome that resistance and move the bike forward. So increasing your tire pressures will improve rolling resistance, but it will also reduce grip. So if you use the manufacturer's recommendations, then you're likely to get the most optimum tire pressure and be able to set the bike up to achieve the maximum miles per gallon. However, I just want to have a little small observation about tyre pressures. The manufacturer's recommendations are generally calculated for Mr. Average. Yeah, so that's what they come up with to try and accommodate and cover most of us that are going to be buying their products. So you can experiment a little with those tire pressures, and by reducing or increasing the tire pounds per square inch by one or two psi, perhaps even a little bit more. But under no circumstances should you exceed the maximum tyre pressure that can be found on the tyre side wall. If you get up to that or close to that, you do increase the risk of blowouts, significantly reduced grip, and you're going to get uneven wear. So you're going to wear your tyres out prematurely. So use the manufacturer's guidelines, but if you're a slightly larger person, you could raise the PSI of those tyres a little bit. And if you're a very light person, you can potentially lower them. See what feels right for you and do a few tests to see how that affects your fuel economy. Right, tip 7 is not really a tip, it's more of a discussion about the use of higher octane fuels v lower octane fuels. I won't go into masses of detail here, but generally, your engine has been designed to run on a specific rating of fuel, i.e., the octane rating. And if it's being run on that fuel, then it should run as efficiently as you can. So check the octane fuel that you're meant to use on your Pacific bike, and I recommend you use that going forward. There is a school of thought out there that if you use higher octane fuels, you'll get improved performance. Personally, that's not been my experience, and that's not my knowledge. Of what's happening. The higher octane fuel, you'll only get that benefit if you start to match the timing of the engine to be able to exploit that higher octane fuel. So you can then be putting super unleaded in. You're probably wasting your money. However, not all fuels are equal. And I think perhaps you might need to give some consideration as to why supermarket fuels are generally cheaper than the main major fuel suppliers, such as Shell, BP, and there's others. And this is because the major fuel providers add additives to their fuel, which can be missing from some of the supermarket brands. And what those additives do is improve lubrication. They reduce the carbon buildup within your engine, and they can also have additives in there to help clean the engine. So those additives can make the engine more efficient. Yeah, particularly the buildup of carbon, or the reduction of the buildup of carbon. So you then have to make a choice as to whether the extra cost of using those fuel from a major supplier versus a cheaper supplier such as like a supermarket is worth it, because you're going to pay more per litre, but in my experience you do get a better fuel economy. I personally use a 3-to-1 ratio where I fill up 3 times in a supermarket, purely because it's very local to me. But on the fourth one, I treat my bike and I use one of the major fuel suppliers that has all the additives, and I give it a little bit of a treat. So not really a tip, but give that some thought, and just think about the health of your engine and that build up of carbon, and also the benefit of using some of those other types of fuels, because not all fuels are equal. Trust me on that. Right, tip 8 is do not coast down hills. Yeah, and when I say coasting down hills, what I mean with that is don't pull the clutch in and let it freewheel down the hill, or put it into neutral and let it roll down the hill. Sort of, there is a school of thought that some says by doing that you reduce your fuel use. However, my thoughts are that it just doesn't make sense to me to do that. And I know there's going to be lots of people out there who will disagree with me, but my suggestion is that if you're coming down an hill, you should choose the correct gear, maintain a very light throttle or shut it off, and but do not pull the clutch in or shift into neutral. And my logic behind that is that when you're in neutral, the ECU is pushing fuel into the engine to keep it idling. Yeah, so you are using and consuming fuel. When you're in gear and you're rolling down the engine, there's engine braking going on, and the ECU realizes this and doesn't put as much fuel into the engine. So you are being more economical than just putting the clutch in and letting it roll down the hill. Also, that's not my main reason for doing it. My main reason for not putting in the clutch or putting it into neutral is you lose a lot of control. And if you just think about this, if you're going down the hill with the clutch in, it's obviously still being gear, and you're picking up speed, yeah, but your engine is not. Your engine is not being matched. When you let that clutch out, there's a lot of forces going in with that engine braking, and you potentially could lock that back wheel up, and you could lose your balance and come off. So there's a safety risk there. The other thing is as well is when you're going down that hill, if you've got it particularly in neutral, you've got to click it into gear, and you've got to try and match the revolutions of the back wheel and the gearbox with that of the engine. And I'm not skilled enough to do that, and I suspect that 99% of the people out there are not doing that. And you've got that same issue of potentially being able to lock up the back wheel. Um, so don't do it. I don't think it saves fuel, and I think it's a bit of a safety hazard as well. So try to avoid that if you can. Right, so tip 9 is about aerodynamics. Well, it's more of a discussion than a tip, but just try to think about this. The more aerodynamic your bike is, the less air resistance you're going to get, and therefore there's a lot less drag, and that requires less power to push it forward. So the more aerodynamic your bike is, the less fuel you'll need, and therefore the more economical you'll be. Now, one of the things we can't do is the bikes have been designed by a manufacturer, and there's not a lot we can do to really improve the base bike or the aerodynamics. But by fitting different accessories, different screens, and guards, foot deflectors, luggage, etc., we do affect the aerodynamics of the bike, and that can be either in a positive or a negative effect. So um, each bike is going to be different. Each accessory and design is going to be different. So it's virtually impossible for me to be able to give you any kind of guidance as to what types of accessories will improve the aerodynamics. And it's just a matter, I think, of using a bit of common sense and a bit of trial and error. But if you can make your bike more aerodynamic, or by fitting accessories that you want makes it less aerodynamic, that will affect the fuel economy on your bike. But I wouldn't be too worried about it too much. Fit what you want, and the benefits of those accessories probably outweigh any kind of benefit gonna or any disadvantage you're gonna get to aerodynamics and fuel economy. But like I say, each case will be different. Okay, so that's all I really got to say about aerodynamics. Common sense, really. Right, we're on the last tip that I've got, and this tip, yet again, if you're happy with your bike, um, then don't worry too much about fuel economy. And I know that's a strange thing to come at the end of this particular video and discussion, but you know, trying to get an extra tiny bit of fuel economy out of your bike and get from something like 50 to 52 miles per gallon, it's not gonna save you a great deal of money. So therefore, my top tip there is, if you're happy with your bike and you're happy with your style of riding and everything's there, is don't worry too much about economy. Just ride it and enjoy it. But if economy is your thing, and you need to get every sort of single sort of ounce of fuel economy out of your bike, um, then potentially look around at the base bikes and choose a bike that offers great fuel economy from the start. Because if you've got a bike that's not fuel not economical, all of the little changes and things you make are only going to make very minor improvements. And changing your bike to something that is more economical to start with is probably going to deliver you the best benefits. Another thing is, if you don't want to use any fuel at all, you could buy a bicycle, but that's not going to be me. Now, I'm not really too worried about fuel economy. Hopefully, that's helped somebody now, and just give you, if nothing else, it's been an interesting sort of discussion. But range, I am bothered about range on a bike, but that will be a discussion for another day and potentially another video. Well, I hope you found that useful, and I'll sign off now because this has been much longer than I expected it to be. Okay, enjoy.